Okay, sorry about that. That's my coffee machine switching off. Don't know. And my coffee. I have my coffee with me. So I'm going to start with Luke. This is the New King James Bible that I do have. It's a study Bible. It's actually, as with the NIV, I have sentimental reasons why it has not been thrown away. It was gifted to me by a young man one day when I really could not afford to buy it because these are very expensive Bibles, and just couldn't afford it. And I was actually in the in the shop, and this kid he was the manager there, and he just gave it to me, bought it for me. And you know what? He passed away. Young guy, very young man, passed away, I think, due to COVID related stuff. So I have a lot of value to this Bible that has got nothing to do with the Bible itself. I really want to buy a New King James Study Bible again, a little bit on the expensive side. So let's start with the history part of Luke. I love Luke. So firstly, it says here, I'm going to put on my glasses because I don't really need them yet, but it makes life easier. Okay, so it says, both style and language offer convincing evidence that the same person wrote Luke and Acts. So that's the former account of Acts 1 verse 1 then is likely a reference to the third gospel as the first of a 2-volume series, and the fact that the writer dedicates both books to Theophilus, who strongly argues for common authorship, since church tradition unanimously attributes these 2 books to Luke the physician, a close associate of Paul. And since the internal evidence supports this view, there is no reason to dispute Lucan authorship. So Luke was the author of this book, according to history. I'm going to read this because it's interesting. Scholars who assume that Luke used Mark's gospel as a source in writing his own account date the third gospel in the AD 70s. Others, however, point out that Luke wrote his gospel prior to Acts, and that's true. He did write it prior to Acts. Acts was written after the gospel, which he wrote during Paul's first Roman imprisonment about AD 63. Sorry for any noises. That's just my neighbors. Since Luke was in Caesarea during Paul's 2-year incarceration there, it says so in Acts 27 verse 1. I love this Bible. For instance, Luke the physician, you can look that up. It's Colossians 4 with verse 14. Those are the references. And Philemon 24 and 2 Timothy 4 verse 11. You'll see all of that there. You'll also see that he was a close associate of Paul the Apostle, and he was also a traveling companion from time to time. Because you will notice he'll say we in Acts. Then you know he was actually traveling with Paul. And then, okay, I digressed. Since Luke was in Caesarea during Paul's 2-year incarceration, he would have had ample opportunity during that time to conduct the investigation he mentions in verse 1 to 4. If this is the case, Luke 1 verse 1 to 4. If this is the case, then Luke's gospel may be dated around 59 to 60, but as late as AD 75. So somewhere in that direction. I think it was earlier because he actually still spoke to Mary. He must have spoken to Mary. there will be information that he would only have gotten from her. He's drinking my coffee. Okay, then he says, so the purpose of this would be, Luke clearly states that his purpose in writing this gospel is to present an orderly account, that would be verse 1 to 3, of all that Jesus began both to do and teach, so that Theophilus may have historical evidence of the teachings he had received. While the gospel is specifically addressed to one individual, apparently a high official, its intent is to give all believers the assurance that Christianity is not one of many speculative systems searching for theological or ethical values, but that this movement is bound up with an event in history. Now, let's just sit with that for a moment. Jesus coming to this earth, being born, is a historical fact. Him living on this earth is a historical fact, which is so perfectly shown by Luke here. And then him dying and being crucified and being resurrected, for that matter, is a historical fact. Yes, it is a historical fact. All of these things is historically recorded, telling you exactly when it happened. So the fact that anyone can say it's just a myth or a fairy tale is ridiculous. It's written in history. So you can make up your own thing about the resurrection if you want to. It's still a historical fact. It's still a historical fact that they got there and that tomb was empty. It's still a historical fact that Judas Iscariot killed himself. You can't doubt the historical facts behind it. So if you want to doubt the spiritual side behind it, you're welcome. I don't. But the physical side, nah, it did happen. It was there. So, for theological, ethical values, but that this movement is bound up with event in history. Luke substantiates the certainty, accuracy of his work with 4 reasons. 1, his concern with early origins, with priority given to eyewitnesses. That's verse 2. 2, his aim to comprehensive all things. So I love this. I love this way, the way that it was written here, because he said he wanted to be comprehensive, all things. And we're gonna read that passage now. Chronological, in orderly account. Again, that's why I really like the Gospel of Luke, because it's chronological. The other Gospels are more personal of nature, so you'll find it a bit more, how do you say this, blotchy, without sounding critical. I'm not being critical, it's just the truth. It is more blotchy. It's like like this, a bit of this and a bit of that. It sounds like the way my mother-in-law taught me how to bake bread, you know, a bit of this and a bit of that all put together. You still get a fantastic loaf of bread, and it's still a true loaf of bread that anyone can eat from, but it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and all added together. Sorry, I just had to clean my glasses. So yeah, all things, an orderly account, and accurate, the certainty. He says that to Theophilus, certainty. You can know with certainty. In achieving this purpose, Luke traces in his 2 volumes the Christian movement from its beginnings with Jesus of Nazareth to its development in a worldwide fellowship transcending the limits of Jewish nationality and embracing Jews and Gentiles impartially. Isn't that fantastic? Isn't that the most amazing words? The most amazing interpretation of this. I just love it. Embracing Jews and Gentiles impartially. That is so God. Embracing them impartially. Luke presents Jesus not as a mere Jewish Messiah, but as a world Savior. Okay, so I can go on and on and on and on and on. But the whole purpose of this is that you figure out the stuff yourself. So I'm going to start reading. Ooh, but I'm so going to use this as a study thingy. Okay, so the book of Luke starts with these words to Theophilus. I'm only going to read until verse 4, so that's the passage I used before. And I may actually just go up. Man, I wish I could just read the whole full chapter to you guys, with you guys. Let's just start at the beginning. A dedication to Theophilus. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed. So it says here clearly that there have been many who have taken in hand to set in order a narrative. So there have been, he speaks of many people who have written down these things that happened with Jesus that have been fulfilled. He says it's been fulfilled among us, so it's been finished among us, it has been done among us. So the life of Christ is something that has, many people have tried to write it down. But he also says, and he says it's from the beginning were eyewitnesses. So these people who wrote it down were eyewitnesses of what happened. It wasn't just somebody who's talking about something, you know, as we call it in Afrikaans, ons het nie telefoontjie gespeel nie. These were actual recordings. Now, in biblical times, I just want to also state that even in this time, when people were writing stuff down, most information was carried on verbally. Having to write something down, and well, no, there were many written documentation. Don't get me wrong. A lot of stuff was documented by scribes, but for the most part, people knew things because it was still recorded in their minds and verbally distributed. So the fact that people wanted to write it down was almost shows its importance. It shows the importance of what happened, that's how I see it. It says this was really, really important, so we have to write it down. Otherwise, we can just continue telling people about it. And these people were eyewitnesses, and they were ministered, and the words were ministered and delivered to them. So Luke, again, was a Gentile. He wasn't a Jew. Luke was a Gentile. I think he probably came to faith through Paul. That's how he became Paul's companion. He was probably just Paul's doctor at some point, and Paul led him to Christ, because that's how Paul worked. He lead anybody to Christ. You know, My logical answer would be yes, he probably helped Paul at some point, because Paul, when Paul in Acts, you'll see that he had an encounter with Jesus, and he had something happen there on a physical level, because he kept on saying there's a thorn in my side, and it's a physical, well, obviously was a physical thing. God never removed it, because it was obviously a physical thing, because he needed Luke. He needed a doctor, and he needed a doctor on a almost permanent level then, or on a very regular level. And Luke would travel with him. You'll see that in Acts as well. So that's an interesting thing about Luke. Yes, he was a doctor. And you can see that, for me, one of the things that stands out with Luke being a doctor is you can see the way he writes about medical stuff. I think the birth of Jesus and John, the whole thing with Elizabeth's pregnancy and the birth of Jesus, Mary's pregnancy, must have been totally fascinating for that man, because he dealt with normal births and normal pregnancies, and he knew Elizabeth would have been way too old to get pregnant, and Mary getting pregnant without having intercourse, all of that must have been like really fascinating for him. And you can see it in the way he writes. You can see it in the way he writes about every single healing ministry or healing miracle, rather, is this guy must have been really fascinated. And by the time he wrote this, he would have been with the apostles on their journeys, or with Paul at least. He would have seen these miracles happen, so it wouldn't have just been a story to him. He would have actually seen people getting risen from the dead. He would have seen people getting healed supernaturally. He would have seen these things. So while he was writing this, it wasn't a mystery to him anymore. It must have been fascinating though. So yeah, just like this couple of, and the most excellent Theophilus really does show that it was a high rank guy, because most excellent in Roman terms, it was a Roman guy, a Roman high ranked officer, or David Parsons believes that it was a solicitor, because he says his interpretation of it is that Luke wrote these things to Theophilus as a almost like an apologetic document to help in Paul's case in Rome while he was being incarcerated. So that would have been David isn't here to defend himself anymore. He's in heaven. But that would have been that was his interpretation of it, is that he, Luke specifically wrote that for that purpose. Yeah. So that's how far I'm going to go now. I'm going to go read the other passages that I want to read and write mine down. I would say that I already started writing this down. So I took those first 4 verses and I did write them down. I've got proof. And I did write down the historical part of it. I did write the words, certain words that stood out for me specifically. I wrote that down. And then I would say, when you study this, I'm leaving the comment section open. So if there's something that stands out for you, just share it. If in the process of studying this specific book in the Bible, there's something that stands out for you, share it. Needless to say, anything negative or miserable, I'm going to delete. But if there's something that you feel God is speaking to you and showing you, Jared, every insight is fantastic. And yes, I will be reading. Let me just see how far I can go now. I really want to try and not read more than, say, 4 or so, too much of it, because then it's going to be difficult. I want to write down all the verses. But let's see, maybe I can just read a couple more. So we were where he says he's writing it to Theophilus. Then he says in verse 5, there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, so that is already the historical context. If you go look it up, it specifically tells you when that time was. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. I don't know how to pronounce half of this stuff, so if I mispronounce it, sorry. His wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord, blameless. So let's stop right there. I'm going to go write those verses down, and I'm going to go look at the words, what they actually mean. Some of the stuff that does stand out for me is the historical, the time that Luke mentions here. So if you want to go look that up, Zechariah was of the division of Abijah. Now, you could only have been in the priesthood in Judaism if you were one in Aaron's. You had to be a Levite, and the Levites were part of Aaron's bloodline, for lack of a better word. Elizabeth was also one of the daughters of Aaron, so she was also part of the bloodline of Aaron. And then it says, and they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord, blameless. So yes, those will be my next verses, verse 5 to 6. Verse 5 and 6. I am going to go and work through those verses, write them down, write down some of the different translations. And I'll see you again tomorrow morning. I'll probably be recording this as I go along. All right, bye.